Okay, so we are Axolotl Productions, and our game is Izcalli of the Wind. So at our presentation last month, we shared progress that was broad and varied, but we've gained a lot of momentum over the last month, and we've made a lot of forward progress that has brought us to where we are today. I'm going to be focusing on 3 areas in which we gain this momentum. So the first is our character, Izcalli. Before, you've seen her as plain and gray, but now we have more to show. She's now textured, and we've added a number of animations for her as well. The second is our gameplay. We've had a lot of plans for our trials and combat, and now those plans have been implemented. Finally is our world building. There was a lot of concern from you all and also from us regarding the set dressing of our world. We tackled that challenge head on, and we have a lot of world building to show for it. So first, we're going to talk about Izcalli. So we have this really beautiful illustration guiding our creation of her, but the last you saw her, Izcalli was gray and drab and not so exciting to look at, but here she is now. We have textures for Izcalli. Not only does she have color and detail, but her board and staff are looking more like our inspiration as well. Our game is all about moving on our hoverboard, so animations are incredibly important. This is what you've already seen, her idle just standing on the board. Over the last month, we expanded her animations quite a bit. So Izcalli can turn now. She can turn while idling. We also added a glide, and she can turn while gliding as well, and she can also turn while moving forward. We have a different animation for turning left and right for each of these states. We've also added animations for her jump. That includes the charge for the jump when using the charged jump feature, a glide at the top, and a landing. We've also added an animation for Izcalli's boost when using the boost feature. So that's what we have for Izcalli. Now I'm going to talk about what she actually does in the world, so our gameplay. We've made progress in the implementation of our conduction trials and our combat system. I'm going to start by breaking down the components of our conduction trials and then talk about the progress we made in combat. So first, we have a couple of visual effects that are part of our conduction trials. The first is the seal. This is what we had last month, and this is the updated version of that effect. Last month, the feedback that we got on this effect was that it was too flat and 2D for our 3D world, so we made it much more dynamic so it shows the energy that we have running through our world. We also had this visual effect, which is objects in the world repowering after the completion of a trial. We've updated this as well. Some of the feedback that we got was that it didn't visually suggest energy or power. This update that we have makes it look more like the energy in our world is a part of these objects, with the emissive pattern coming through instead of just the moss leaving it. With that, I want to show these in the context of the trials. So we've talked about our payload trials before. In the past, we've only shown you this slide showing what we hope to create, but now we have the payload trial implemented for our game. As a reminder, in a payload trial, Izcalli gathers energy and then deposits it to repower seals. So this is what that payload trial looks like in our sandbox. Izcalli deposits energy in a specific location, which powers up that seal, and that's when we see that seal visual effect. Once all of the seals are powered up, the world around her is repowered as well, and then that is when we see our other visual effect, which shows the power returning to the objects. We've also talked about our plans for a time trial. That is implemented now as well. We have 2 types of time trials. We have a sequential and a non-sequential with 2 types of goals, gates, and targets. So the first example is our sequential trial. In this type, the player has to fulfill the goals in a set order. The timer resets at each goal and shows how long the player has to reach the next goal. In this example, the goal is traveling through gates. And then in this example, the goal is shooting targets. This is our non-sequential time trial. In these, the player can fulfill the goals in any order, but as you fulfill them, you gain a time bonus to your overall allotted amount of time. If the player doesn't finish these time trials in the time allowed, the player needs to return to the start and restart the trial. We also have combat. in now. So Izcalli can use her staff to fire wind projectiles at enemies, which are turrets, and then we'll have drones in next month. With this attack feature, the player can fire from the hip without aiming, or they can use our aiming feature to be more precise. Our aiming is two parts. The first is our aim down sights. This makes the attack easier to aim, especially while moving, where you're going to hit. And we also have our slow down time feature. These two go hand in hand, so when the player does aim down the sights, time slows down so that the player can aim. This is especially useful when flying or jumping in the air and you don't have as much control over your movement. The player can also defend themselves by deflecting projectiles. So if the player deflects the projectile right as it's about to hit them, it's reflected back to the turret. Otherwise, the projectile is just deflected in another direction. This feature uses the same energy that's stored by the board and used by Izcalli to do things like boosting and whatnot. This means that the player can't just keep their shield up indefinitely. Now that we've looked at Izcalli and what she does, I want to look at where she does it. So a big hurdle for us this month was building up our world. It was the main point of concern we heard in feedback last month, and it was a concern that we had as well. We dealt with this problem head on, and our approach allowed us to build a lot of momentum in world building. So we started with a plan. We immediately sorted out what needed to be done and when it needed to be done in order to get where we needed to be for today. We created this flowchart for a couple of reasons. It let everyone involved know how their work fit into the bigger picture. It also proved to be really helpful when we checked in weekly. We were able to use this visual representation to compare our actual progress with where we should be, and then make any adjustments that were necessary, which of course did happen. So this was a working document over the last month. I'm going to talk about the steps of this process, starting with our environment art. These 7 pieces are what we had to show last month. The number of environment assets we have available has expanded significantly over the past month. So, first, we have this set of modular structural pieces that our level builders can use to create the structures that they need in a given area. On top, we have walls and pillars and such. And then on the bottom, we have a set of modular ramps. We also have this piece, which was specifically designed for the main island that we had previously planned, but we've used it in other ways as well. We also have this set of decorative columns that can be used by the level builders throughout the world. We also needed pieces that could be used for interesting playing surfaces. Here you can see some ramps on top and some swoops and pipes that can be used to create varied play experiences. It was really important that we make some of these pieces like this ourselves so that we can make sure that the topology worked with how our board flies. We also created some pieces to add some character to our world. These are inspired by the feathered serpent wind god in our game. This helps us make it our Aztec-inspired world and not just any Aztec-inspired world. And finally, we have our conduit and bowl. These are the focal point of our island. Previously, you've seen this as like that big teal pyramid in our white box level. In total, our team created 32 assets this month. I think this is a really good example of what I mean when I say that we've built a lot of momentum this month. Not only have we increased our asset count by like 4 times, most of these assets are really versatile, so our level builders can use them to create new areas with ease, and that allows them to continue with the momentum that we've built. I now want to talk about that level design process a little bit. So 2 of our level designers focus on whiteboxing the island and on gameplay. They reduced the size of the island overall. They also reduced the size of any of the wide open areas that we had. They added a functional space around the perimeter of the island, which creates a circuit of gameplay that uses the different gameplay abilities that we have in the game. Once those 2 level designers were completed with that, they moved on to assist our other 2 level designers who were focused on set dressing and lighting. So to work on our set dressing, we chose these 6 areas of focus to set us up for that. Now, these areas that you're looking at here did not exist at the last status update. So these before images are actually from the first week of this month. We started with a big push in set dressing this month, and we've been really building on that initial momentum. I'm going to go through each of these shots and talk about the before and after to look at the progress that we've made. So in this shot, you can see how the level designers have used some team-made art assets like that pillar tunnel to make the world ours. You can also see the conduit in the background. This is a closer shot of the conduit, and you can see some of the progression of our art assets from the proxy to final stages. This is an example of an area that was previously really open and is now much more enclosed and therefore easier to handle as far as set dressing goes, but it's still big enough to allow for some fun flying and playing with that hoverboard. So this area is the entrance to our drifting area, where the player needs to use the drifting function to navigate through a forest. On the right, you see a sort of shrine that has one of our seals that will be utilized in a trial, which will be implemented in the future. So this is inside of the drifting area. As you can see, a lot went into set dressing this area. I think that the difference between this before and after really shows the progress that we were able to make in this last month. It's virtually unrecognizable from before to after. This is the entrance to our platforming area. You can see some evidence of iteration here. On the left of each of these frames, you can see another one of those shrine areas. In our before shot, it's a lot more closed off and required the player to make a 90-degree turn in order to see it. But our level designers opened it up more to the player, since a sharp 90-degree turn doesn't exactly suit the movement style of our game when it comes to seeing parts of the world. And this is the end of our platforming section, which is also the end of our circuit. So in these pictures, you may have noticed that there are still some proxy assets and some white box pieces in these areas that we're set dressing. That is something that we plan to address in the next month. And speaking of plans, let's talk about our critical path. So this is what we shared last month. Things needed more attention, so we had to update this path. So we've extended our work on the main island through the end of May so we can finish it up. And we have also pushed back our work on the second island to May and June. We also added a couple of features for our tech team to work on. Now, with April being over, this is what we have left for development. By our next status update, like I said, our main island will be complete. Our second island will be white boxed and ready to start set dressing in June. The art team will continue to make environment assets for our second island, as well as the art assets necessary for our combat system, so our turret and our drone. We're also going to get started on our 2D intro cinematic. And then the tech team, by next status update, will be done creating new features and will be ready to move on to alpha. Now, we've been using Critical Path for our production cycle, but we are going to be switching to using Kanban during alpha, which works really well given how we've set up our bug tracking. Right now we have a Trello board where team members can report bugs according to the guidelines we've set up that include things like the information that needs to be on each ticket and how to determine the level of severity. We have integrated our Trello board with Slack, so we have a channel that keeps us up to date with bug progress automatically. We only just started using this toward the beginning of the month, and it's already been quite helpful. We've already tracked a handful of bugs through to completion. We're early on in our official bug tracking, so it's hard to see any trends in the data, but we are looking forward to seeing what we can do with this in the next month. So this is what we plan to complete by today, and then these are, we were able to fulfill most of our commitments. I'm not going to read through all of them. You've already seen them, really. Everything in brown is what we have completed, and then the items in yellow are still in progress. The items that are in yellow have been pushed back to our May commitments. So this gives a breakdown of what we plan to have for the next status update in May. So for production, we're investing quite a bit of time into completing that main island. We want to make sure that we have enough time to get that to where we want it to be before moving on. We have less time allocated to working on our second island. It's quite a bit smaller than our main island, and we've already done some work on it so we can get to where we need to be without as much time investment in this next month. Also by next month, we're going to have a first pass at sound effects in our game. We are starting to think about playtesting more seriously. We already have about 60 playtesters who have volunteered to playtest our game remotely, and we plan to send out a playable build in May, along with the surveys to collect data. So our programmers are wrapping up the last few loose strings of features to implement. So the last little bits of our combat system and our environment system are being worked out in this next month. Our artists will be creating assets specific to the second island, but we will also be able to move on to more detailed assets because our second island, like I said, is smaller and some of the assets for it have already been created. We're also going to get started on our 2D intro cinematic and continue to add animations for Izcalli and continue work on refining our visual effects for our slipstreams.